Hey Joshua,
Hey, how are you?
doing well. It's nice to officially meet you. We haven't met before.
Yes, it is nice to meet you. We talked through a Zuma, but this is the first time we see each other face to face on Zoom, I guess.
Awesome. Yep, for sure. So I'm want to make sure that I'm getting all the um, everything all set up correctly for everyone. Anything you guys want to see in particular today,
Um,
or just keep it open ended for the most part?
so the process I thought was to show them how to sign into like the student version of Snaptrude right now, because that released
Hmm.
recently, right? And then basically how to go through that on the web, how to import like a site, let's say, and how to use like the masking tools and sketches. That's like
Perfect.
basics. And then if we could record this, that'd be great also, so that I can share
Yep,
with people participating in the competition. So
for
basically,
sure.
what we're learning from here is just how to use the basics of it, and then the students later will use it on their own, and then I can share with you guys how it goes.
Absolutely. Cool. Yep. Just want to make sure I've been doing so many webinars lately. I just want to make sure that I catch everything. So the way that I'll plan on doing this too is I'll really just focus on the showing the things that I remember going through school that would be beneficial as far as design competitions, studio
Right.
projects go. Um, and we can I want to focus on the tools that lend themselves really well to being able to design, but also being able to um, actually associate your designs with a program, geometry,
Right, right.
like that, right?
Exactly.
So cool. Well, that sounds awesome. So I guess it's all going to be in person today, correct?
Yeah. So
Okay, cool.
I just have students kind of filtering in right now. So we're just gonna give them a few more minutes. Maybe we start around one if there's some stuff you want to prep, and then we're gonna go till 1:45.
Awesome.
Okay with you? And yeah, so I'm just gathering some students more. We have some students in here already. So yeah, um, I'm just gonna mute for a second to make sure everyone's good, and then we'll get
No
started.
worries at all.
All right, thank
All
you.
right.
Hey, Taylor.
Hey, Joshua.
All right, ready whenever we are. We have the students here, so.
Awesome.
Okay. Awesome.
Okay, everyone's able to see me. Okay, I'll screen share, so it won't just be me the whole time.
Yes.
But
Yep, you're all good.
alrighty, cool. Hello, everyone. Appreciate you guys letting me join your class virtually today. Josh and I were talking. We were thinking of just doing a quick Snaptrude overview. Give you guys basically a combination of useful tips, but also just show you guys around the platform as a tool that, I wish I had when I was in school. A little bit of background about myself. I practiced architecture at Perkins and Will in Seattle for about 7 years prior to transitioning over to the architectural tech industry. So I did a lot of computational design in Rhino, Grasshopper, and things like that. And ultimately just decided that I'm more useful in architecture tech than I was designing buildings. So now I get to essentially share tools that we're building at Snaptrude with architects and students like yourself. So with that, I think we have like 45 minutes. Is that correct, Joshua? You can give a thumbs up. I know you're muted. Okay, cool. With 45 minutes, I'll try and give you just high-level overview of what Snaptrude is, what you can do in it, where the main areas of focus are. And then from there, we can get into a little bit of depth, try and show you some of the modeling tools, where to find things, show you some of the fun AI rendering features as well. So with that, I want to jump right in, make sure we can maximize the time. I'm going to turn my camera off because my internet likes to wrestle me when I'm screen sharing with the camera on. And then I'm also going to screen share. And let's go ahead. Alrighty, Joshua, would you be able to give me a quick thumbs up if you can see? Awesome. So I want to basically just start off with just a high-level overview of, user interface, Snaptrude, sort of what it is, what you can do there, right? So we're looking at a finished project here. Obviously, once we get back into it, we'll dig into like how you can start modeling things. But for the high-level orientation, I feel like it's always a little bit easier to just see a finished model, right? So what we're looking at here is a research center project that, we put together. It definitely wasn't at all inspired by our company logo or anything along those lines. But this was, an initial project we put together just to demo Snaptrude's capabilities so you can see it. So within Snaptrude, the kind of core thing to realize and to understand just about the way that you use it is that there's essentially 4 different areas where all of the work gets done. So those areas, they're all responsible for a different type of work and you'll interact with them slightly differently, right? So what we're looking at here, and I'll actually switch to our sort of core mode. We're looking at our main design mode. So this is primarily where all of the 3D modeling and geometry creation happens. Within Snaptrude, it's going to be most similar to I think Rhino and SketchUp, right? Where you'll do a lot of that geometry creation. But the really big differentiator here between us and something like Rhino or SketchUp, especially in school, is you guys probably are learning that Rhino and SketchUp are really awesome 3D modeling tools, but they're less awesome when it comes to being able to correctly associate like programming data and design data and being able to track your overall areas, right? And that's where you see software like Revit be a lot better. And so where Snaptrude sits is you can kind of think of us sitting in between a SketchUp and a Rhino and Revit, where we try and pair a lot of the sort of easy 3D modeling and 2D modeling tools with actual data that helps to basically validate how you're going about designing and creating spaces within Snaptrude. So this is one of those finished projects here in design mode. But one of the core aspects to how we associate data with design is actually through what we call our program mode. So this is going to look, much more boring, but don't underestimate the ability to have a spreadsheet that's directly tied with your model. So what program mode is essentially a live readout of all the spaces that you have in your design mode. So as you draw spaces here in design mode, all of those spaces are going to populate in your program tab. so that you can essentially start tracking the areas and all the different metrics and everything like that. So you can start to see and set target areas. So this is really helpful, especially with school projects, if you're kicking off with like a program brief, or you have like a studio project that you're starting that's very specifically has a program that you need to design to, you can add that program here into program mode and then actually start using that as a design target to start designing to. So that's within program mode. Jumping back into design mode really quick. All of that data that's in program mode is also available to you in the areas panel on the right side here. So you can see basically that it's going to give us a whole readout of our areas, as well as the departments that we've assigned within the program. And it's also going to tell us how much of that area we've actually achieved within our design. So you can see we're, in this project, we're achieving 100%. The last two tabs, BIM mode, this is actually already a BIM model, so it's not going to look as different than what we had before. But BIM mode is going to be something that we typically see firms and professionals using when they're actually ready to translate their geometry and their data into Revit. And so what this will let you do is actually convert a massing model, which you'll see me modeling here in a little bit, into a BIM model that then can be taken into Revit for, SD, DD, whatever phase of design they need to get into from there. So BIM mode is we'll probably focus on that a little bit less today, because I want to make sure that we can get high level massing design concepts out. But it's definitely a helpful feature when you are actually going into Revit. The final one is going to be our present mode. So if you guys are familiar with like Miro or FigJam or any of these other softwares, it's essentially an infinite canvas that's directly within Snaptrude. And so what this does is it gives you the opportunity to start pulling views and sheets and data directly from your model. So you'll have access to all of those views here into a canvas like this, where you can start to create sheets. And the other ridiculously cool thing that saves a boatload of time is we've built in a lot of AI rendering and video capabilities. So you can actually go in and you can prompt like a specific style to render over your massing model. And so you can start to ideate using that as just a way to really, quickly get iterations out. This is my personal messy ideation board. So you can see I've just been testing, 1,000 different prompts, different views, different, visualization styles, right? So this really becomes that sort of like canvas where you can take the actual model and ideate, materials, rendering styles, and additional concepts, and even use Google VO3 to create videos out of it. So that's kind of like, high level overview of the Snaptrude sort of user experience itself. Joshua, if anyone has questions, I'm happy to answer those as well. Or I can also go straight into just kind of working with the tool, showing you what it's like to essentially build and create things.
I think we're good for now. I think we can go to the second part. That'd be great.
Cool. So that lines up pretty perfectly. We've got about 35 minutes and we'll just jump in. I've got a blank model here. And I'll show you basically like how I'd start a project from scratch in Snaptrude and how I'd sort of start taking that up. Because there's a lot that you can start to do in a lot of different ways to work with the tool. I, having a design background, much prefer to be a little bit more hands-on with how I interpret the program and the design. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is jump over to our program tab here. I'm actually going to close this other model out. So I'll jump over to a program tab here. And then what you'll see on the left-hand side is we basically have like an AI prompt box. So what I'm going to do is upload a program document. And this program document is then going to be able to be translated into Snaptrude itself. So I'm going to use something called interpret here. If you have like a CSV or a PDF, you can upload that. I'm going to use a CSV upload on this. So I'll go ahead and click upload CSV, and I've got my program created. All this is just a spreadsheet that I'm importing from Google Sheets into Snaptrude itself. So you can see really high level, it's just giving us the program that we've established. So if you have, if in, Studio, you have a program sheet that you want to import here to use that as the targets, you could absolutely do that. So right now, this is all just sort of, quote unquote, dumb data, where it's not actually influencing geometry or anything along those lines yet. So what we need to do is basically select all this geometry here, and we'll make sure that we're in interpret mode. And then we'll just say, create a create a building program on the based on the selected cells. So we'll prompt this really quick. Then what it's going to do is basically read through our entire spreadsheet here, and it'll go in and convert all of these to actual Snaptrude specific objects that we can then use to set our targets or start designing. There's a lot of flexibility with how we do that. So this normally takes just a little bit, and then we could go ahead, take a look at that, and start actually modeling and exploring some more present mode stuff here. Joshua, we doing good over on that end? Cool.
We do have one question on the.
Sure.
So AI, from what I know from my experience, AI is influenced by previous precedents and examples. So is this software using those precedents or specific precedents to influence your design?
Not like specific projects or precedents there. What it is more going to be geared towards is best practices and design standards. So you're not going to be able to be like, make a Corbusian chapel, right? It'll be a little bit different than that, and where instead of focusing on like actual project precedents, it looks more at like industry standards for spatial requirements. So like when you're looking at the adjacencies, like, do you want to have an auditorium or a music room next to your library, right? So like best practice in terms of like how you're organizing the spaces and how you're creating these spaces. So it's not going to be case study specific, like, model it after this building. It's going to be more geared on just industry practices and industry best standards there.
Thank you. So mostly it's interpreting the massing in a practical way. What about the style of the building? Like, for instance, you had a really interesting facade. Is that something that the AI software comes up by itself, or do we have to prompt that?
No, so that would be that design was all just basically me designing the facades, right? And so the way to position most of the AI features right now is we're not designing a completed building, basically. The intent here is, especially with early stage AI, obviously so much of this is really early in development, and we're obviously, I mean, this is the best example of this is if you guys all saw, several years ago, AI videos of Will Smith eating spaghetti, right? It was really messy and you looked very much like AI. 3 years later, it's almost indistinguishable, right? And so similarly, especially with our industry, like LMMs are less good at geometry. And so the creation process for how this goes is we're building agents on the back end that basically can take control of the tool that we give it access to. And so as a result, the outputs initially are going to be more spatially based and less like, here's, my studio prompt, here's the final building, boom, everything's done, in a day or two of prompting, right? So we do very much try and be conscious of like the designer's role and making sure that this comes in as an assistant, so that we can let designers design and try and automate some of the more tedious parts, right? Does that answer the question? I realize that was a little bit of a longer-winded answer.
Thank you.
Yeah. So now we've got that done. If I jump into our program data tab here after doing that interpret, you'll see what it's done is it's actually converted this to a much more formatted input field. So we have basically space labels are all the spaces that we need to include within this program, the area achieved, and essentially the room count that we have achieved here. So this is, obviously kind of boring to look at. It's a spreadsheet, but if I jump back into design mode, what you'll see now is in both 2D and 3D, we're populating all of these spaces directly on the canvas for us to begin working with, right? So that's like typically where I like to start designs in Snaptrude is like, let's just get the program in. And now we know the targets that we need to design to, and then we can kind of decide what we want to do with it after, right? So before I even get into like designing anything, I'm always liking to know, contextual awareness. So what we get to go ahead and do from here is I'll just import a site I'm actually just going to import the same site that we had on our project because it's the same program. So if you click on the name dropdown, you'll be able to import. You can import several different file types here, but I'm going to grab the TopoSolid, and this is in California, and we'll basically pull this information in for us to start modeling with. Since this is a lab building that we're doing as our sort of initial test, we'll do just outside of San Diego. Fun fact, this is about, I think it's like 2 or 3 miles up the road from the Salk Institute. So keeping with the programmatic relationships and, you know, the area, there's a lot of big notable lab buildings here. So we'll pick the cliff sides of San Diego for our lab building. So what we can do when we have import site, you can basically specify if you want to bring in the 3D elevation, 3D buildings, if you want, you know, satellite versus street map. And then you can also do property parcels. But for this one, because our site is a little bit unique, I'm not actually going to turn that on. If you guys are doing infill sites or any projects in a city that has, you know, very specific site boundaries, property parcels is going to pull that data in from, it's a provider called Regrid, and that's the actual property line of your site. So you can design on it, you know, with a pretty high level of confidence there. So I'm going to leave that unselected for now because I'll show you just how to draw a site manually as well. We'll go ahead and we'll import this. Should just take a quick second and we'll have this in. So we've got basically the site, the 3D buildings all pulled in. I'm going to just move this off to the side really quick. We don't want this to pop up here. So when I pull that in, you know, you'll see all the information that we have selected, right? We've got the 3D buildings, 3D geometry. I can always come in and I can change the view settings. If I want to just draw, you know, on a flat surface, I can do that. I can turn off elevation, satellite, toggle buildings on and off, right? I'll keep them off for this just because it's a little bit simpler to see. So from here, you know, the last, you know, barrier on my end to me being able to get in and start designing is I need to draw a site. And so in order to draw a site, I'll jump into my plan view. We can see all of our views on the left side here. And I'll grab our line tool. So the toolbar up here, we try and keep these design tools as like dead simple as possible. We want it to be easy to learn, easy to work with, so that there's less, you know, ambiguity about, you know, what am I actually doing, and more working and actually figuring things out. So if we jump in, I'll use the line tool here. And on the right side, I can choose which object type. We want to draw a site for this. And I'll just start creating this outline here. And we'll close the loop and start building a site. And we'll get just like a rough shape initially. So one thing that you'll see is immediately as I create this site object, it's going to add an overall site area. Joshua, you can thumbs up or thumbs down if the concept of like floor area ratio has been rolled into studio classes yet as requirements. Okay, cool. So the crazy thing is when I was in grad school, no one mentioned floor area ratio until like the last semester. And they're like, oh yeah, by the way, this is super important, and no one ever taught it to you. So good to know more people are learning about that earlier. But so the site area is actually what's going to be used to baseline your FAR, just for total reference. If you ever are working on projects that have that as a requirement, you can see that by clicking in the top corner, and under net internal areas, you can click FAR here. We can set the overall FAR on our site. So because our site is really big right now and we have, you know, a smaller program, we're only at a 1.76, but that's just helpful piece of information to know. Once we have the site in place, there's several things that we can do from here. If I want to start trimming things, I could certainly come in and actually start trimming the edges of the site if I want, you know, rounded corners or anything like that. And I could start deleting those and just making the site fit a little bit better. In the interest of time, I don't want to spend too much time getting into, you know, the topography of the site and things like that. So I'll leave this as one building pad, and I'll show you basically how we can start to integrate this with our TopoSolid, because right now you can see that we haven't actually set a datum. So once you have that imported here, we'll go ahead and we'll click on set datum. And what this is going to do is basically bring the area that I click on our TopoSolid up to basically level 0. If you did want to, you know, have a design, I think you probably could see in the last one that where the topography and the site was actually sort of cascading down with the site. You can split the site and do multiple cut and fill operations. But again, I just want to make sure that we have time to see modeling processes. So we'll just do one. It'll look sort of silly as a building pad, but it'll give us something to work off of. So once you have this, you know, it's roughly aligned to the middle of the site, which is for early stage design, certainly going to be good enough. I'll just use our cut and fill, and I'll go ahead and I'll select the site that we just drew. I can specify cut and fill angles, but we'll just leave it at 90 for this because it's most simple and effective way to do this, right? So as I've done this, you'll see now that we've basically cleared out a building pad and some area for us to actually start massing and start creating geometry in the scene. So now is basically the point in which, when I'm designing specifically, I sort of get to a point where I'm trying to decide how I want to approach this design, right? And so there's a couple of ways to go about this here. If you want to design from like a space first approach, is what we call it, you could actually just come in and you could start either grabbing, this is going to be the actual department level object that represents basically the sum of all the spaces plus the room for circulation. Or you could actually start working with the individual objects themselves, right? So I've always been a design first type of designer where I like to get the whole building figured out, make sure that the gross areas are hitting my targets, and then I'll go in and infill the spaces as I need. But the great thing about this is you can actually do both. So like one method that you could absolutely start doing is you could start just dragging and dropping, spaces onto the site to plan out, your ground level. So you could certainly do this as a method. And that would be more of like an inside out approach. In practice, we typically see these approaches being used in different typologies, right? So, oops, those are instances of each other. So you'll typically see these happening, in different types of buildings that you're modeling. So like a school, for example, they're going to be much more conscious of the actual adjacency of the spaces much earlier on than a commercial developer who comes to you and says, maximize the FAR, fit the most building you can on this site, right? So one of them is going to call for a more outside in approach. One of them is going to call for more inside out. Because I want to show you guys also the actual design tools, I'm going to actually show you the outside in, and we'll use this as a target. So the way that I'm going to do this is going to be a little bit counterintuitive, but it's going to give you guys probably the most option to see sort of the different ways that you can use Snaptrude. So what I'll do is I'm just going to grab everything and I'm going to delete it. And we're just going to design this from the ground up as like a design concept, right? And again, this, especially for this like intro to Snaptrude, this is really all geared on actually manually modeling and using the tool to create a design yourself. Obviously, there's some AI features built in that will assist that process, but those are really only valuable once you actually know how to use the tool at its core as well, because we're meant to be, designed first for designers. So I've just done, something seems counterintuitive. I've deleted all the program. The important thing about this though is that all of those targets are actually retained here. So now I'm achieving 0% of my total targets, and I've got basically all of the program that I established, could be from a studio brief or from a client, whatever it is. And now I know, okay, I'm going to start designing to these targets, right? So if I want to go in on my site, I'm on my ground level here. My favorite tool to start designing with is basically just the line tool, and I'll switch to a space. And I use the line tool with offsets. It's just fun to draw in, and you can start creating building masses really quick, right? So if I was to say, I think we could do like a 60-foot offset here. I'll make sure I'm doing the right side. Yeah, that'll work. And I'll sort of try my best to mock the building that we were just looking at, right? So let's do something like this here. 100 feet there. So as I do this, right, it's going to create a default space. It's going to assign that area to it. But it's going to be really easy for me to start manipulating this. I can use our push-pull tool. I can adjust the edges. All these areas are going to be modified as we go, right? So I can certainly come in, start doing this and modifying it. As you're getting into this, the line tool and the arc tool can both function as a drawing tool and a splitting tool. So we have the opportunity here to split the space on overlap. So if I wanted to start, doing any like rounded corners, whoops, I could come in here and I could start rounding these corners off, splitting them. I'm going to be doing some more rough modeling here, but we can start to sort of massaging this shape into a more refined design concept, right? So the other tool that's going to be your best friend, in addition to line tool and arc tool for drawing, is actually going to be the edit tool, which you can use with the hotkey P. So this will let you drag any edge of the design to push things in or out, but it'll also let you drag like individual vertices here, right? So if I wanted to just start adding angles to this and, add like a 15-foot angle here, or if I wanted to use the line tool and actually split this, I could do that. So there's a lot of flexibility with, how we go in and how we start manipulating these spaces and start modifying them. The whole point of it is, again, really meant to be trying to speed up the early stage designs process, especially, as architects are talking with clients, like they are burning money the longer they take to get to a design decision, because most of the time architects aren't allocating significant amounts of budget to these really early stage studies, right? So what we could do here is we could actually, pretty quickly start converting this into a design concept. And this is going to drive me crazy that I didn't align this, so I'm going to fix this. Here we go. So now we could basically start turning this into a design concept. What I'll do here is I'll just grab our copy tool. I'll copy this, and then I'll use Q or the rotate tool. And we'll just rotate that to build our sort of, fun Snaptrude logo concept here. So once we've got this in place, we can start to look at this in 3 dimensions as well. So if I jump into 3D here, what you'll see is that these are obviously going to be 3D objects as well as 2D objects. As you're going through, if you want to change, floor to floor height or anything along those lines, you can jump into the stories tab, and you can change the floor to floor heights here. So we could set this to, like a 14-foot for that ground level. And that will automatically update the masses for us as well. So we've got a lot of flexibility with how we go ahead and do that, but I want to make sure we get to like some sort of a design concept here. So let's actually go ahead and turn these into, those massing models. So if I come in and I select our default site object, you can click on duplicate above, or you can just use the control or command up arrow, depending on if you're on Mac or PC. And so what you'll see is as I'm copying this up, we're creating these default spaces here. And they're actually going to be starting to attribute to our total areas. So now you can see this high level mass is at 86% achieved. Now, if I want to do this here, I can start bringing this up, and we're at 97%. Maybe we want to pop up one more, and then we can start to carve areas away. So we're sitting at like 108% of our building area. We know we can fit all of our design in here. And now we can start actually coming in and refining this a little bit more, right? So what I could do from now is, like, let's just say we want to make the ground level a little bit more interesting for, pedestrian access, right? So we can come in, really important sort of tool for how we work with objects is when you do this duplicate above and you start pushing, pulling in 3D, what it's going to do is it's actually going to create instance versions of these objects so that you can basically edit an entire floor plate all at once without necessarily having to make those changes on every single level. So this is really helpful for projects where you're going to have like a typical repeating floor plate or things like that. But then from here, if we want to, really quickly turn this into a design concept, let's go ahead and we'll make both of these floor plates unique at the ground level. So we'll say make unique. And what this is going to give me the opportunity to do is start pushing and pulling and basically making this more pedestrian friendly, right? So I could push this in, say 10 feet. I want to have a little cantilever there. Push this side in 3 feet if we want to have a little walkway. And basically start just really quickly putting together that design concept. So we'll do this just to get something nice to look at when we do some renderings. We'll say 3 feet here. Maybe we want to do like a colonnade or something 6 feet there, right? So we're getting all this, high level masked out, blocked out. We haven't really done anything with our program just yet, and that's fine. And sort of the next step is, I'm sure as students, you guys would take this to much greater levels of detail, using just the overall design tools and, push pull and starting to pair these things together. But there is an element of, okay, well, what happens when we have our design concept, and how do we start to, reincorporate the program into it, right? And so we can start to do that now. And there's a couple of ways that we'll go ahead and do that. So I am going to jump into, I think we'll jump into like one of our typical floor plans here. We'll say plan 2. And I'll show you basically just like how this works from a really high level, right? So we could actually go ahead and start subdividing all of these spaces into different departments and into different spaces themselves, right? So I'll go ahead and I'll use my line tool, and I'm going to make sure that I have split space on overlap here. And I can just draw really roughly. We'll line up to this here. We'll line to the center here. Go. And so now what you see is basically we split these spaces. Again, I can push and pull these as I need to if I want to align things a little bit better. But what I'm doing is basically taking our floor plate that's just assigned to a default sort of generic department here. And now I can come in and I can actually start, let's say we want to add, like some circulation here. So if I come in and let's do the line tool again, we'll add like a corridor. We'll just say 7 feet. And with that offset, I can come in here and I'm adding, circulation. And I'll continue to start subdividing this place using the line tool, right? So we'll just say roughly we want labs on this side. We'll start splitting things. We can have some shared spaces. And let's say this is feeling good enough, right? So right now they're all just default spaces, but the really good thing about this is you can select any of these default spaces and we can start to actually assign labels and departments to the spaces themselves, right? So we've got a default assigned, but it remembers all of the targets that we've previously set with our wet and dry labs and all this, right? So I could come in here, I could assign this to wet and dry labs. And now we're basically starting to color code, the overall program and the spaces, and start getting a little bit more granular with how we're creating this, right? So I'm breaking this down just from like high level departments right now. But you'll certainly be able to get in and I can show you even going from departments into more levels of granularity a little bit later, right? So let's say we want to have, let's just do labs and collaboration zones, right? So we're missing a building core here, but that's totally fine for now because we're just learning how to assign all the departments and everything. Joshua, do you guys have any questions overall on anything you've seen so far, just about like assigning those? I want to make sure that, I'm not talking 1,000 miles per hour and just losing people.
Oh, you're good. It looks good so far.
All right, cool. So once we get into it, I'm sort of speed running this whole workflow, but we're assigning things like as decisions are made, right? Like you're gonna design a building and you're not necessarily going to know exactly where, the wash closet or one lab is going to be. And so we're trying to take this from a high level of granularity to a much more refined level of granularity. So these decisions that I'm making here in, 4 seconds are, likely going to take a lot longer when you're working with clients, right? So if we wanted to take this department and start splitting these into individual labs, right? This is kind of the next logical step once you say, okay, this wing or this zone is dedicated to a wet and dry lab, or this is dedicated to, the support services. You could start to do that here, right? So I'm just going to go into my program really quick because I totally forgot what I was trying to program for our labs. So we can see we need basically a standard lab module and like a wet and dry lab. So we could come back to our design here, and we could just call this wet and dry lab. And then we could call this like standard. So as I change this, you'll see that there's basically more levels of hierarchy that are getting introduced here, right? Where they're retaining that department association, but they're also their own unique spaces now. And so we can start using this as a way to incorporate our design targets and basically prove that we can fit, all the program we're saying that we can fit, but also be able to just gain a better understanding of like how spaces are sitting out and what the adjacencies are, right? So we could start doing this, for the entire floor plate if we wanted to, and start subdividing these, and we could just, grab both these at the same time, call them standard lab. So is that all sort of making sense from high level? Good there? Cool. Last 10 minutes, I think we could probably jump into some of the present mode and just show how to like use some of the AI inspirations and turn this into a design concept, right? So if we jump into 3D here, you'll see now that because these floor plates are essentially instance objects of each other, I've basically just edited the entire building just by modifying one floor plate. So I created that typical floor. Now I can continue to start modifying and sort of creating, different massing modulations and things like that for the model, right? So from here, if we get to a point where we're like, okay, cool, this is pretty interesting massing. Maybe we want to start saving out some views and going into program mode and or present mode, excuse me, and ideating sort of what this could be, how we could present this, and what sort of materials we could use, right? So what I'll do is I'll show you guys really quick in the view settings. You have the opportunity to change the view mode here. So there's 3 view modes to start. There's department mode, which is just going to be color coded and associated back to the departments you have. Texture mode, which is going to start as gray, but this will give you the opportunity to, jump into BIM mode, and you can actually use materials very similar to SketchUp and start painting those faces on if you want to just, really start ideating and roughing out materials. And then there's also just a monochromatic white mode, which is just a little bit more simple. For this, I'll just use this department view mode here, and we could come in and we could go ahead and basically just save out some views. So this will be, our quote unquote hero shot here. So in the views panel on the left, I could go ahead, I could click the plus button. This is going to give me the opportunity to save the 3D view. And now if I jump back into present mode, we can start to reference all these views. So this is our little AI generated diagram pop-up. This is mostly helpful for planners who are trying to gain understanding of just spatial proportions and sort of high-level relationships. So these automatically get created with every sheet. But if we jump into our views panel here, you'll see we've got all of our plans pulled in. So if we wanted to jump in and pull that second floor plan, I could drag that floor plan in here, and I haven't changed the view mode here. So I would need to go back and change the view mode, but we can change the scale of this if we want to increase the scale to make it a little bit larger. We can also take control of these, the text and the labels here and start, changing them as we need. This also gives you the opportunity to add like rounded corners to create more like diagrammatic floor plans and things like that to the scene as well. So that's just sort of quick pit stop in the floor plans. But 3D views are all going to be populated in the bottom portion of the scene, right? So if I drag and drop this 3D view in here, we could go ahead and actually start rendering over this view and creating different, conceptual renderings over this. So we can say, let's just say under this massing model with realistic materials, glass, sod, and let's say activate the level with entourage and people and trees and create as a rendered scene, and let's just try out sunset for fun. So once you prompt that, I mean, the more detail you add into the prompt, the better the output that you'll get here. And as with pretty much anything and everything AI related, testing different prompts, testing different outputs, different sort of cues to the design is always encouraged, right? Because you might not get the best output off the first glance, right? Whereas this is just sort of like a generic curtain wall, right? But if we wanted to start turning this into like a more conceptual approach, there's a couple ways to do that. We could do that through prompting, or we could do that through actually painting materials onto the model as well, right? So we could come in here and we could actually say, we could say render this as an architectural watercolor concept. So this is where you could definitely start pulling in just a lot of styles into the scene as well. And I think one of my favorite things in school was always like finding the style for my project and the rendering style that I like to use, right? And so being able to basically start creating like a library of prompts that you like, right? So if I like this as an output and I'm like, cool, this is actually a really good style, then what I could come in and do, I always like to just copy and paste the prompt, and I'll add a notepad here and I'll add this as a note. So now as I'm going through and creating more scenes, I can just have this prompt saved because it's worked well in the past. I can probably assume it'll work well again. And so I can come in and I can start creating these scenes and start creating, different styles and different views, and even rendering over them as images. So that's just really high level sort of Snaptrude overview, how you could get in and start creating massing concepts. I know there's about 5 minutes left. Joshua, if you guys have questions or comments or, whatever else might interest you or benefit you guys, happy to get in that, because I don't want to just hog all the airways too much. Oh, Joshua, I think you were muted there.
Sorry, could you repeat your question?
Oh yeah, I was just saying, in the last 5 minutes, I want to make sure, if you guys have any questions or comments or anything that, you'd like to see covered, happy to jump into that. I just want to make sure, I give you guys time for sort of whatever you prefer.
No, thank you so much. It's awesome. Especially the renders. This is really cool.
Yeah, the renders are fun.
They're just asking if we can import I know I saw it earlier, I think, but just to make sure, like our models, like we have some Rhino files that are pretty complicated, but if I import it into Snaptrude, would it be able to handle it and then use it in like render mode as well?
Totally. You can import quite a few models, including Rhino files. So there's actually a plugin where you can pull that in. And you can just pull in the Rhino geometry there, and you could just go to town in present mode on rendering that.
Yeah, I'll definitely be using this.
Yeah, it's pretty sweet. So you can do the same with Rhino files. Revit files you can do as well. Obviously, Revit models can get so heavy that always make sure you just bring the geometry that you want to have in the scene, because no one needs a couch with 100,000 polygons in their scene, right? So yep, you can import that. There's a plugin, and if you click the upload tips, it'll tell you how to install that and how to start bringing that in. You can also just import just plain FBX files as well. Like if you exported it from Rhino, you could load that into Snaptrude and start using that there. And then I will say one thing I didn't show you guys in present mode. This is obviously just really simple versions of a massing concept. Again, as you start adding more colors and information, it's going to pick that up, and the more detail that you put in, it's going to render that detail as intended as well. But the other cool thing that I will mention too is you can actually select which rendering engine you want to use. So you can use GPT, Flex, Omnigen, all these, they're good, but Nano Banana is just kind of stolen the show lately. But you can also, and my favorite workflow is testing Google VO3 on Nano Banana renders and prompting like a fly through. So and I'll let this run. Normally the VO videos take like a minute or two to create, but this should be done by the end. So yes, to answer your question in a long-winded way, you could definitely import Rhino models, Rhino geometry, if it's computational or parametric, with some more complex features or surfaces. Definitely try that and see what sort of outputs you can get there. They're pretty slick.
A student with another question for you.
Hi. Really quick.
Yeah.
So the plans that you generated, you manually made the units themselves. Does this AI handle like automated generated units inside the floor plan, or is that not?
Not quite yet. Again, I always mention, most AEC AI tools are sort of in the early Will Smith eating spaghetti phase. And so we're trying to make sure that, as we roll this out, like so much of this is just based on like the levels of granularity, right? Like we want to make sure before we know that we can space plan a singular space or and the walls within it, that we can get, the building output and the adjacencies and the logic there. And so it's not going to be able to do like individual like floor plans quite yet. That's where, we still rely on sort of the architect's intuition and design knowledge there.
Since you're like behind the scenes, right? What do you expect this like new AI development where you can sort of convert this software to do these things? How long do you think it would take?
I mean, a lot of the capability is there. It's just these tools take a lot of time to build. And like, if you think about just how many conditions there are for an AI to take into consideration when it's actually trying to create a, specific building output, like there's a lot of different factors and different jurisdictions have different rules. And so there's part data gathering, right? To make sure that we're giving the AI the information it needs to be able to make correct assumptions and data. But then there's also a part like capability and making sure that, we're actually able to give it access to the tools that it needs to create these, right? And so currently we're actually working on building envelope generation so that you would actually be able to prompt and create something that looks like this just right off the bat. So that's, several months away. Probably less than several months. It's in the works, but all of this I expect to happen probably quicker than any of us would think, but I wouldn't have like a specific timeline for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Appreciate the question. So you can see we didn't give it a super good prompt, but trying to do a little bit of a fly through there for us.
Wow.
Cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, did you guys have any other questions? Or I also, I'm happy to share my email with you guys as well if you have questions as you're modeling some of this stuff. There's a couple ways to get in contact with us. Email is one of them. My email is literally just taylor@snaptrude.com. If you want, there's a chat bubble down here. This will route directly to myself or two of the other architects on the team, and we'll be able to answer troubleshoot questions like within a couple minutes, as long as it's not middle of the night.
Yeah, understood. Thank you so much for showing us this.
So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'll reach out to you for if we can get this video for the Zoom recording so I could share with students. And if you have any other Zoom, maybe webinars that you might be able to share, that'd be great.
Yeah, I'll take a look. We've got a couple that we've done recently that I'll send you some.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Alrighty.
It was great meeting you, and we'll keep in contact.
Awesome. Thanks so much, everyone. Appreciate the time. All right, we'll see you. Bye.